evidence collection in relation to the Public Health Wales Bill and emphasising part 2 of the bill today. And we move into our next session. And can I welcome Professor Peter Hajek from the UK Centre for Tobacco and Alcohol Studies and co-author of the Public Health England report, which was commissioned and published in August this year. And obviously that is an important area for us to consider in relation to part 2. And if it's okay with Professor Hajek, we'll go straight into some questions. Gwyn?
Good morning. Do you think that we should be concerned about young people starting to use e-cigarettes?
I think it's a very legitimate concern. The evidence we have so far is that it's not happening, which is good news. It doesn't mean that it will stay like that forever, but at the moment, the evidence we have suggests that e-cigarettes are remarkably unattractive to non-smokers. Now, to understand it, probably we need to understand that nicotine by itself is not that addictive. What is very addictive are cigarettes. But nicotine, without the other chemicals and without the speed absorption, very quick absorption you get from cigarettes, seems to be not terribly attractive drug. It's not easy to, in animal models, you can get animals to self-administer cocaine or even alcohol, hard drugs, but it's not easy to get them to self-administer nicotine. We know from nicotine replacement treatments that non-smokers do not get hooked on nicotine nasal spray or inhalator or chewing gum. And e-cigarettes are in the same category in terms of attractiveness for non-smokers. So non-smokers would try an e-cigarette, and that's happening increasingly, but rather remarkably they don't progress to daily use or even regular use. We often see misreporting, and I think it's important to realize in this rather controversial area that there is a rather frequent misinterpretation of data. And this is one of these areas where some studies would label anybody who once tried e-cigarette as a user, and if they tried an e-cigarette within the 30 days, they would label them as current user, which of course makes no sense because current smoker is somebody who smokes daily, not somebody who tried a cigarette 3 weeks ago. And so I think we've been misled, or the public has been misled by these reports to think that there is some kind of upswell of non-smokers using e-cigarettes, and it is not happening. And the explanations are rather interesting and would take us into some other area. But the fact is that it's almost impossible to find a young non-smoker who would be a daily vapor. Now, just to put it in context, because all the discussions about e-cigarettes need to be balanced against discussion about real cigarettes. And if a young non-smoker tries a normal cigarette, you may be surprised, but there's about 40% chance, over 40% chance, that they will progress to daily smoking. That's an enormous proportion of people who just play with cigarettes progressing to daily use. With e-cigarettes, this is not happening. Virtually nobody. I mean, there must be some out there, but it's negligible. Non-smokers who become daily vapors. So, if my children were to try one of these, e-cigarette or normal cigarette, of course I would much prefer they tried an e-cigarette. And this actually tallies with the fact that we see an accelerated decline in youth smoking. So despite this increased experimentation, it does not translate into increased cigarette uptake. It may even contribute to decrease in youth smoking. We don't know the causality, of course, it could be some other factors, but the fact that the smoking in youth is going down rather than up certainly shows that e-cigarettes do not have a recruitment effect. So that's just to alleviate these worries. But as I said, it may change in future if e-cigarettes become more like normal cigarettes and increase their dependence potential. that may change. And we need to monitor the situation very carefully. I think that's what's happening, certainly in England with the tobacco toolkit study. You have very good data in Wales as well, and one needs to keep an eye on it. But at the moment, it is not happening.
Why do you think then that the flavouring is put into e-cigarettes then?
The flavouring is attractive to smokers. In our studies, we see people who usually they start with tobacco flavouring, and then they discover actually they like some fruit or sweet flavouring more, and they switch to that. So the taste appeals to smokers. Fruit flavouring, by the way, is probably the most popular, even more popular than tobacco flavouring in vapors, in adult e-cigarette users. Whether the industry means it to target children, I don't know, but if they do, they're wasting their money because it's not attracting non-smokers.
Thank you.
John?
Yes, it's pretty early days in terms of evidence, obviously, as far as e-cigarettes are concerned, but evidence is beginning to emerge. I just wonder whether you're aware of a study in Los Angeles which showed that young people, 14-year-olds who tried e-cigarettes were much more likely to go on and smoke tobacco products than those that didn't try e-cigarettes. It was reported a couple of months ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Are you aware of that study? And if so, what would you say about its findings?
Yes, there's actually 2 studies now showing this. But the interpretation of it, again, has been, I think, it has been misinterpreted. If you looked at people who first try normal cigarette, of course, they're much more likely to try e-cigarette later on. And if you look at people who try e-cigarette, they're much more likely to try normal cigarette later on. All the study shows is that people who like to try these type of things, try these type of things. It's a bit like saying that anybody who ever drank a glass of white wine is more likely to try red wine than people who just don't like alcohol. Actually, that study you mentioned also measured one personal characteristic which explains which young people would go for this type of experimentation. It's called sensation seeking. There's a scale and it puts you, how likely you are to try risky new things. And this subsample, and there were only about 12 of them, or 19. It was a very tiny sample. And despite the small sample, they were significantly more likely to try risky behaviors than the rest of the sample. So the study itself included the explanation of the phenomenon. So you've got a group of people who try risky things, and they try both. It absolutely does not mean that trying the one led to trying the other. It just means that these are people who try things.
I think it might be quite interesting for the committee chair to have knowledge of the other report that you mentioned, Professor, the one other than the Los Angeles study that I mentioned. So I think it'd be quite useful to have details of that if you could provide them.
I can send you the study, okay. So
if you could send us the link to the paper, that would be very helpful.
Is that the other one?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Alan?
Thank you very much for your evidence. It's very, very useful. I presume that you support most of the provisions that are contained in the TPD.
Yes, of course.
You do?
But not the e-cigarette ones.
Right, okay.
Tobacco product directives have got, it's a big document trying to lower smoking prevalence, and it has got bits about real cigarettes, which are very useful and important. And then it has got this section on e-cigarettes, which, to my mind, this is my personal opinion, is misguided.
Okay, so I presume we'd mainly discuss in Article 20 provisions, yeah?
If you're talking about the e-cigarette provision, I think that is misguided,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me why you believe those provisions are misguided and which provisions you have particular problems with?
It favors cigarettes against e-cigarettes. So you've got 2 products competing for smokers' custom. one of them kills half the users, and the other one have known health risks so far, although they may be a small proportion of risks. So you obviously would want smokers to switch from the dangerous one to the much safer one, and this regulation will make it more difficult. It prohibits the manufacturers to actually say that it is safer than smoking, although it's patently the case. It limits the nicotine content for no reason I'm aware of. So the really heavy smokers who successfully switch to e-cigarettes will be forced to go back to smoking or doing something illegal. And there's a lot of things there which are dictated by fears and worries and what's called the precautionary principle, but it's misapplied. I have some understanding for this because this all was put together several years ago when we knew much less about e-cigarettes than we do now. And so people at the time have been worried about the gateway effect and safety and so on. But in the meantime, we now have growing evidence. There's still lots of things we don't know, but we have growing evidence which suggests that really smokers should be encouraged to switch from smoking to vaping. It would be for many a life-saving intervention.
Do you believe then, therefore, that e-cigarettes should not be regulated in any way?
Oh, it has to be regulated, and we have to keep an eye on the safety. We have consumer protection regulation, as you know.
Yeah, and outside of basic consumer protection, do you believe that the e-cigarette product should be regulated in any way?
Well, for safety, yes, of course.
Yeah, for basic safety in terms of manufacture, I accept that. But you don't believe there should be any restriction? You don't believe there should be any restrictions on use, on sale, or on marketing?
It certainly shouldn't be marketed to the youth, and that's something we have to be very careful about. It should be marketed vigorously to smokers, and it's not happening at the moment. Where I'm coming from is a serious concern about the public and smokers being misled by whatever worries there are, thinking that e-cigarettes are not any safer than normal smoking. And we have data showing that year after year, more and more smokers believe that e-cigarettes are harmful, and that puts them off doing something which could save their lives. My interest is in smoking-related death and disease, and I see e-cigarettes as having a tremendous potential to alleviate that. And so I'm a bit concerned. Yeah.
So, but you don't believe they should be marketed to young people?
Of course not, no. And we have to be careful that it's not happening, and sales to young people have to be prohibited. And
so you
need to continue to monitor it.
So you would want to see some restrictions on the marketing and sales?
Definitely.
Yeah? And I presume use as well, so you would say under 18 or under 16?
Well, if they're smokers, they'll be much better off to vape. So for smoking use, I wouldn't see a problem. I wouldn't want to bar them from moving to a safer product.
But you wouldn't. But you would expect to have a minimum age of sale or use?
Yes, I think that would make sense because we have that for cigarettes. So I would go with the.
Okay.
With the
so you do